Hi everyone, this is Ryan Selby with Sternbuild Medical, and I am going to make a fairly large or long video today. I have a lot to cover. I've actually received some requests on my new YouTube channel to do a pressure comparison on a bias flow respiratory care system between a RAM cannula and an Optiflow Jr. 2 cannula. The reason for that is in the market, RAM is portrayed as a CPAP cannula, or one that can be used in both high flow and CPAP, and other cannulas cannot do what RAM does because not knowing exactly everything about RAM, but the size of the tubing and how the tubing is designed would help with the CPAP. So we're actually going to do a test on that today. We'll cover CPAP interfaces, use that as a baseline so that we can do a comparison between all of the cannulas, and I've sized the Optiflow with their correspondent RAM cannula, and we'll put that onto my test baby. And then you all can see the data, and we'll go from there. So let me orient you what I have going on. I have my test baby lung here that's going to be reading pressure for us on the screen. On my iPad, these are Bluetooth together so that you can see the pressure yourself more effectively. I brought with me a manometer that measures actual bubble CPAP, since I'm using a bubble CPAP as my bias flow system. And that's going to read the pressure, obviously, on the circuits. So that will tell us what the pressure buildup is in the circuit. My baby Liv here will tell us the pressure buildup within the lung, and we're going to interswap all of the interfaces as we go along and see how they test out. So starting off, when you look at a nasal tubing or a CPAP interface, and when we say CPAP, obviously it's continuous positive airway pressure, or continuous, a lot of people say it differently. But anyway, when you want to have something that is a constant on your CPAP. And in order to do that, meaning there's not any variability into it, that the pressure you set is the pressure that's getting into the baby. A colleague of mine will call cannulated CPAP, he calls it DPAP, and that's dynamic PAP, or dynamic positive airway pressure, meaning that it's not a constant and it brings in the variability, which I like the sound of that as well. So we'll call this CPAP and we'll call this DPAP just for this video. Anyway, what makes a CPAP interface is there's three aspects on this interface that allow it to provide that constant or continual positive airway pressure. One, it has large bore tubing. And if you look at a cannula, or if you look at a CPAP interface, this tubing is relatively large. And the reason why it's large is because we're driving a lot of flow and a lot of pressure between that. And when you have a narrowing of the tubing, you have a restriction on how much flow you could drive into that. If you look at a cannula, it has very narrow tubing. Some cannulas will say, well, there's no limitor flow. That's just not physically possible. As you get narrow and narrower in the tubing, you are going to have a restriction on how much flow you could drive through that. Even this large bore tubing has an upper limit of how much flow you can drive into it. It's not an infinite amount of flow that can be driven. So number one, it has large bore tubing. Number two, it asks for 100% occlusion and errors. So CPAP is a closed system. If you have any leak within the system, then you will have a reduction in your CPAP pressure. If you look at cannulas, they ask for high flow about 50 to 60%, and for those who recommend using it for CPAP, we'll say 60 to 80%. Well, we've already incorporated a leak. So, and the reason why that they have require that leak is because the third and final reason of why a CPAP interface is a CPAP interface is the bias flow, if you look to the side here, runs all the way to near to the nose of the baby and then runs out through the expiratory limb. And the nose of the baby is right here. So when they breathe against those prongs, they're able to exhale out of their nose against those prongs, regardless of the CPAP. Well, I mean, if you set the CPAP 5 or 10 or whatever, they can exhale against that, keep their mouth shut, and maintain that constant positive airway pressure. if you look at a cannula, I'm going to swap this real quick. If you look at a cannula, the bias flow goes from here and out here, and you have this much tubing now that the baby has to exhale against, which is just not possible for them to do. So if they exhale against this, does that air go back up through the prongs and back in the tubing, and then they're rebreathing CO2? Or do they have to exhale around the prongs, which is why they say 60-80% occlusion? Or do they end up exhaling out of their mouth? So all of those are potential problems on what impact that could have on the CPAP. So let's go ahead and get started with our demonstration. We're going to go ahead and plug this into my demo baby. We're going to turn on my manometer so that we can read the pressure within the circuit. We're going to turn on some flow. And I have set my CPAP to 5 centimeters of water pressure. And if you look at manometer, it says about 5.2. I have 100% occlusion in the nares. And I'm bubbling quite nicely over here. And if you look at my baby, these are Bluetooth together, we're getting about 5 centimeters of water pressure, plus or minus 1 or 2. I just need this to our baseline so that when we do cannulated CPAP, we'll have a comparison to do. Okay. When we take out the pacifier, or there's I use a pacifier here to close out the mouth leak. When we take that out, my bubbles have stopped. My manometer is going down, telling me I have a leak, and my CPAP on my baby or my baby lung is actually running low. So eventually this guy will alarm for me, but I'm going to go ahead and close off that alarm by plugging the pacifier back in, and now we've established a nice CPAP again, and everything is going great. All right, so let's go ahead and stop that data. Now what we're going to do is I have sized the RAM cannula and the Optiflow corresponding Optiflow Jr cannula sizing. So for the cannulas, based strictly on percentage of occlusion in nares, I didn't look at anything else but just percentage of occlusion in nares. I used the same prong sizes, so the green RAM and the yellow Optiflow are the same size. So we're gonna run the test with those side by side. The blue RAM and the purple Optiflow, they're the same size. So we're gonna run the test with those side by side. And then finally, the orange RAM and the green Optiflow, they're the same size. So we're gonna run a test of those side by side. So let's do test number 1, which is going to be the green RAM and the yellow Optiflow. These come in at about 60 to 80% of occlusion. Let's go ahead and silence my little manometer here. First things first, when I plug in my RAM, is you'll notice that it's still bubbling on my bubbler over here. Let me bring that up so you guys can see this. Oh, there we go. So it's still bubbling. My manometer says 4.9, but it's not on a baby. Okay, so my manometer is no longer at play. And the reason why is, let's go back to what we were talking about before, that large bore tubing is necessary for whether you're using a ventilator or a bubble CPAP to communicate with that baby. And if you have a narrowing of the tubing, the flow and the pressure is slowed down, causing back pressure, which forces it over into the water, and it tricks your alarm. So the question is, with this particular guy, is how much pressure is the baby getting? So we say 5.1 on my manometer, and we'll go new. It's going to come up in red, and it comes in at 2 centimeters of water pressure. So I've shown this in the past, about 60-80%, and we're seeing about a reduction of CPAP by about 60-80% as well. The vibrations have been virtually eliminated when you come in at that small of a cannula. So the recommended sizing comes in about 68%. You're going to see a reduction not only in the CPAP, but the size of the waves of the bubble CPAP. Problem is as we discussed, is I have a baby's pacifier in right now, and I'm expecting the baby to exhale against all this tubing to get back to the bias flow, which just simply can't happen. So the baby usually spits out the pacifier, can't handle a chin strap, and now our CPAP is down to 0.5 centimeters of water pressure. I've showed this a number of times. What we want to do is see what happens with the green RAM versus the yellow Optiflow. So I've taken off the green RAM. I've plugged in the yellow Optiflow. It's bubbling. And it says 5 centimeters of water pressure, just like the green RAM did. Let me go ahead and plug this into the baby's nose. And it comes in the same. So it's coming in at green. You can see it green here, and it lays right over the green RAM cannula. 2 centimeters of water pressure. The vibrations aren't that high. And what this tells you is that there's nothing special about one cannula over the other. It's really all about percentage of occlusion and errors and the size of the tubing. So when we take out the prongs, because the baby wouldn't be able to breathe on the Optiflow as well through its nose, and it drops down to the exact same level with the, not the prongs, but the pacifier, exact same level with the pacifier. So we're gonna go ahead and stop that data. And now what we're gonna do is we are going to size this up to the purple and the blue. This comes in about 90% of my percentage of occlusion. And we're gonna have to clear some data here. Yep. There we go. So this one comes in at 90%. So I plugged in the blue cannula, and it's still reading at 4.9, even though the blue cannula is larger than the green, and it is still bubbling. But I do have a larger percentage of occlusion of the nose. And as soon as I plug it into the nose, the bubbles are a little bit more vigorous. And then you'll notice that the CPAP in green is now close up to 5. That seems to be working, right? The problem is now that we have come in at about 90, it looks like maybe, oh, that's a 90 to 100%. It's all about percentage of occlusion and errors. So they said, well, why don't we just use 90 to 100% occlusion of the cannula? And the reason why is because the baby cannot exhale against all of that through their nose with the pacifier or a chin strap on. It's just not possible. You're talking about a full occlusion and errors, or as close to a full occlusion, 5 centimeters of water pressure. They can't exhale out of their mouth because we don't want them to, and thereby you're forcing them to exhale out of their nose against all of this pressure, which they can't do, thereby forcing them to become mouth breathers. And it says 5 centimeters of water pressure here. I've got great bubbles, but the baby's actually getting 1 centimeter of water pressure. So same problem that we saw before on the smaller RAM cannula. Let's go ahead and stop that data. Now, to show that this is not magic on one cannula over another, we're going to go ahead and do the purple. So the purple and the green are about the same size again. So the purple Optiflow and the green RAM are the same size. And therefore, based on what I've been telling you all in this video, they should have the same numbers. And they do. Again, we're coming in at 5.1, and the purple Optiflow It's now coming in blue. My system just won't clear out, but that's okay. I'm going to be able to talk you all through it. The blue is coming in at 5 centimeters of water pressure and is laying over the ram. So the purple Optiflow and the blue ram worked exactly the same because they have the same percentage of occlusion. But we're also faced with the same problem. The problem is now we have close to 100% occlusion in theirs, and the baby can't exhale against that because it's got a pacifier in his mouth. And when we take the pacifier out, this one, a new wrinkle all of a sudden happens. Let's go ahead and stop this. My purple cannula no longer is creating a false bubble. Why? The reason why is the marketing that RAM will tell you is the reason why RAM works is because it has larger bore tubing. I just selected 2 cannulas that are the same size, and it turns out that the purple Optiflow, in theory, has larger bore tubing because it is no longer creating false bubbles. And when I increase my flow, I'm now able to create false bubbles because I've gone past what it's able to withstand. But we have just demonstrated here that the purple Optiflow does indeed have larger bore tubing than the blue ram, even though they have the same prong size. Very interesting. Okay, let's go ahead and silence that. We've got one more test and then we're done. We're gonna do the big boys. So let's go ahead and clear this data. And it just doesn't seem to work for me, but that's okay. Let's go with the orange Optiflow. So the orange Optiflow, the orange ram is generating bubbles, and we have a pressure manometer reading of a 4.8. And we're going to plug the prongs into the nose. Give me a second, because these prongs are relatively monstrous. And it actually does about the same as the blue because they were both as close to 100% already. So we're getting about 5 centimeters of water pressure, 5.2. But when we have the orange ram in the nose of the baby, or when the pacifier is taking out, it's still bubbling. Show this because if you have this on a ventilator or a bubbler, your alarm's going to be tripped. This is giving us a false reading, and that's because of the size of the tubing of the ram. The OJ2 cannula is the corresponding color is the green OJ2 cannula to the orange ram. So let's take a look at that. Plug that in. Turn off, silence my thing. Get these. He also has monster prongs, so give me a second to get this into the baby's nose. Okay. And as expected, it lays right over the orange. In fact, it's actually reading the best of the three. It's running a little bit higher. This one is truly the big boy. It's reading about 5.3 centimeters of water pressure. And when I take the pacifier out of this guy, the bubbles stopped. The bubbles have stopped. So, the green OJ2 cannula has larger bore tubing than the orange ram. So basically we've essentially demonstrated that the size of the tubing on the ram cannula, in my opinion, is not any larger than its competitive cannulas on the market. In fact, It appears to be that they're actually smaller. The cannula that performed the best when compared to other cannulas for this particular demonstration was actually the largest cannula that F&P sells, which is the green OJ2. But it's still not meant for CPAP because we just simply can't maintain that CPAP because the baby cannot keep their mouth closed in order to receive that continuous positive airway pressure. They're forced to exhale out of their mouth because of this large exhale. So as clumsy as this interface appears to be to use, or Hudson or others, they're designed this way for a reason in order to give the CPAP that you want. All right, thank you very much. Feedback would be awesome, and you guys have a good day.